Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know if Kickstarter is launching this week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the Kickstarter and GameFound campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. Before we get started, I do like to go over some new discoveries and announcements that I just found out about in the past week, and the first one I have for you is for Dying Light, and this is currently a video game, and this is a game that's going to be adapted into a board game this year. There's not a whole lot of info out on this one yet, but it is coming from the same publisher that created the board game Frostpunk, which was also adapted from a video game. It seemed to get a lot of positive reviews, and it seems like this publishing company does have a lot of experience in the board game space. So if you want to know more about the Dying Light board game, definitely subscribe to the channel because I will be covering it in the future in a ton more detail once more details are released. And then the next update I have is not for a Kickstarter, but it is for a game that I really love. Dwellings of Eldervale is going to be getting a second edition. There's not a whole lot that's going to be changed about this. They're just splitting the way that the content is divided into the boxes, and there's going to be a new expansion added as well. They did clean up some of the rules. From my understanding, it hasn't changed a whole lot. They just made some rule clarifications and things like that. But one thing that they are doing that I am a huge fan of is that they are removing the wash that was previously applied to the miniatures. If you're getting the deluxe version, there was no way for you to get the miniatures without the wash. So if you prefer to paint your miniatures yourself like I do, this is definitely a welcome change because you definitely don't want to be painting over a wash because you'll lose a ton of detail. But if you did like the wash and you were less inclined to paint your miniatures, unfortunately that option is no longer going to be available. Other than that, it seems like all previous content will be available, so if this is a campaign that you missed out on and it's one that you want to add to your collection, this is a great opportunity to grab it for yourself. And the next new discovery is also not one that's going to Kickstarter as far as I know, but it is a really interesting piece of news, and that's that Carcassonne is going to be getting another expansion, but this is going to be for a co-op adaptation, so you'll be able to play the game fully co-op, and the theme here is that there's going to be some different graveyards and ghosts are going to be escaping into the different tiles. It's going to be up to the players to try and keep those ghosts at bay, because if the tiles get overrun, you're going to lose the game. As far as I can tell, it seems like this is going to be a standalone expansion, but that you can also mix it with the newer version of the game. You can probably still mix it with an older version of the game, but there will be a visual discrepancy between the tiles. And that is all I had for new discoveries, so let's get into the Kickstarters. And the first campaign we have launches on February 28th, and this is going to be a reprint for Factory 42. And this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a Euro-style game that uses primarily resource management and worker placement, and it also makes interesting use of a cube tower. And the whole concept of this game is that players are foremen within the Factory 42, and you're trying to manage your workers in order to fulfill orders for your government. The catch here is that your government is also an authoritarian government and has some strict rules and bureaucracy that you're going to have to deal with. And if you're not always able to get what you want, you might want to also engage in some shady deals. And there are a few really interesting aspects of this game. The first is that there is a lot of player interaction since all the players are operating within the same manufacturing facility. Everything another player does is really important to you when you're trying to decide what you want to do on your turn. Players are going to be moving around different rail cars, generating resources, and you're going to want to pay attention to what the other players are doing. On top of that, each action space does also have a secondary action that only one player can perform in each action space, and it's going to be augmented by the number of players that perform the standard action in that space. So that's just another way that you want to anticipate or take advantage of what the other players are doing. And the other really interesting aspect of this game is the way that the resources, cube tower, and bureaucracy all work in this game. Players are going to be gaining their resources through the cube tower, but the cube tower also represents bureaucracy because certain cubes that go in may not be the same cubes that come out. There are a few multi-level chambers within the cube tower, so as you put your cubes in, some might sit in different areas and not come out right away. So even though you see exactly what goes into the cube tower, you may not see those cubes that went in up to a few turns later, and you will see cubes that were put in on previous turns. Players will be trying to funnel these resources into different rail cars to move them into different manufacturing zones, but players can also use these resources to burn to generate steam. So there are a couple purposes for the resources, and you're going to want to optimize that to try and put yourself in the best position while trying to hinder your opponents. And the game's played over 6 rounds, and there's 4 phases each round. In the first phase, players are going to be drawing an event card, and that's going to have a game-changing effect that will affect all the players. Players will also then draw invention and order cards. The order cards dictate what combination of resources are required to generate different levels of a product to fulfill that order, and the invention cards will allow for special abilities for the different players throughout the game if they choose to play an action to activate it. The second phase is the worker phase, where players will be putting their workers out onto the main board, and players will be putting these workers into these spaces to perform different actions. And those actions can be things like extending your warehouse, gaining new resources, loading rail cars, moving those rail cars into individual player boards, generating steam to convert those resources into products, triggering abilities on their invention cards, or researching new upgrades for their player board. And when you are moving around and loading rail cards, you really want to be aware of what your opponents are doing, because anyone can move a rail card to any other player's personal player board, and that can help or hinder you depending on the opportunities on the table and what that player is attempting to do. Luckily, actions are not actually executed until the following turn, so you can start to see what the other players are trying to do as you're putting your workers out. And then on the third phase, those actions are actually going to get executed in a particular order that is outlined on the board. Once all the actions have been executed, players will get bonus points for fulfilling different orders, and there will also be bonus points to the players that were able to fulfill the most orders. The fourth phase is the cleanup phase, and then the rounds repeat, and after 6 rounds, the player with the most victory points wins the game. And I did mention that this is a reprint, so there are some changes that are going to be coming along with it. For the most part, the game plays exactly the same, but they did make some improvements to the iconography. This was a big area of contention in their previous release, so they did listen to their audience, and they did improve that iconography so that the game is much more easy to play. And the biggest change that this campaign is offering is that there will be a Black Market mini expansion, which is going to add some other ways for players to fulfill orders. And of course, there will be some upgrades and stretch goals that players will unlock throughout the campaign, so you can look forward to that as well. And if this one interests you, definitely check it out. I have links to the campaign in the description below, and if you follow along, you'll also get a free wooden first player token added to your pledge. And the next campaign, also launching on February 28th, is the Downfall of the Third Reich. And this plays 2 to 3 players and takes about 100 to 240 minutes to play. And this is a war simulation game where players will be playing either as the Axis, the Allies, or the Soviet Union. And for a 3-player game, each of those will be played by a single player, but with a 2-player game, you're only going to be playing with the Allies against the Soviet Union. And the main countries included in this game are going to be Germany, Finland, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, but there will be some other countries that make an appearance as well. The game begins in the winter of 1940 when Germany was first planning its invasion, and each turn represents a 3-month period. And players will be performing a number of actions on their turn by spending action points, and the different things that players can do is improve their supply, their reinforcements, or their armor. They can also make certain developments on the map, as well as perform different air or submarine missions in order to attack their opponents. Players can also make general movements and attacks, and these do not have an action point cost, but you must have at least 1 action point in your supply in order to do them. The game was designed to have a simple rule set, be quick to learn, and to simulate World War II in a European theater. And just like all the other campaigns, if this one interests you, I have links in the description below. Before we get into the campaigns for March, I just want to mention a few campaigns that I was expecting in February, but I never got an exact launch date for. And the first one is called Moogh, and this is a game for 2 to 4 players where players are split up on different tribes, and you are competing for victory points as you try to take down a woolly mammoth. Players are going to be gaining victory points for their contribution to taking down that woolly mammoth, and this one actually won quite a few awards on Board Game Geek's Print and Play Design Challenge. And the next one is Keresis, which plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a strategic board game where players are going to be exploring a hex board and manipulating that board and gathering different resources with the whole goal to try and control different areas in order to earn victory points. Players will be trying to unleash different powers in order to defend their territories, and the player with the most victory points will win the game. And then we also had the Bad Karmas and the Curse of the Zodiac, and this plays 1 to 4 players, and this is a cooperative boss battler where players are going to be engaging in battle with the different creatures that are associated with each of the zodiac signs. These zodiacs will evolve as the battle continues, and they'll respond to the actions that the players perform. And then we have Through the Ice and Snow, and this is a Euro game for 1 to 5 players where players will be each controlling their own ship and their own crew as they explore the North Pole. Players will be trying to maintain their crew's morale by hunting, exploring, and discovering new species, and trying to earn the most victory points in order to win the game. And now we're getting to campaigns launching in March, and the first one I have is Illiterati, and this is launching on March 1st, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 40 minutes to play. and this is a real-time cooperative word game where players are going to be drawing letters from a bag, and then players are going to be trying to fulfill different word objectives by creating words with the tiles that they've drawn from the bag. Players will be drawing cards from different books and repairing those books one word at a time, and if you are able to get to the final chapter, then you win the game. And the way that this game works is that each card is going to have an objective for the players to try and complete, and you're going to be using the tiles that you have in your possession to make combinations of different words in order to fulfill the objective that is laid out on the card. Players are trying to make use of all their tiles in order to form these words and complete these objectives, because any leftover tiles will get burned, and if you have too many tiles build up, then you are going to lose the game. Some objectives of the cards could be to create antonyms or create words that are all different animals, and if players are able to do this without burning too many letters, they'll win the game, but this does offer an adjustable difficulty as well that you can tailor to your group's skill level. Also launching on March 1st, we have Gigawatt, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play, and this game takes place in Europe during the end of the 20th century, where the entire economy runs on gas and coal. And the goal of this game is for players to compete and be the first ones to convert all their coal and gas power plants into sustainable energy. And the way that this works is that each player will have 2 tracks that they're going to be managing, their supply and demand, and if they are ever able to supply more supply than there is demand, as well as having converted all their coal and gas power plants into sustainable energy power plants, then they will have won the game. And each game consists of 5 rounds. The first round, players will be buying technology cards, and these will gain abilities to the different players that they can use throughout the game. The second phase is the building phase, where they can buy new power plants, new storage facilities, or create new connections to other regions. And creating connections between those different regions will allow those players to trade with those regions more efficiently, because by default you can only trade 1 cube, but if you create a connection between different regions, you can trade up to 4. The third phase is the dice and income phase, and as I mentioned, there's 2 tracks that the players are managing, and they're going to have player pawns on each, and there's the demand track and the production track. Players are going to be rolling the demand dice and adjusting their pawn on the demand board accordingly, and then they're going to be adjusting the production track according to the production that they're generating from their power plants. If players don't generate enough energy for their demand, they're going to gain red cubes equal to the difference, and this is going to represent the shortages. But if players generate too much energy, they're going to gain green cubes, and these represent a surplus. Players will gain income based on the demand that they're able to fulfill, but you will also get penalized if you have any shortages. Luckily, you can trade cubes with other players, as well as other regions that are not controlled by players. When trading with a non-player controlled region, you're going to either gain or lose money equal to the number of shortage or surplus cubes that you were able to trade. Or you can trade with the other players, and there's no rules there, so you can negotiate whatever you're able to and try to get a better deal than dealing with the non-player controlled regions. Players will then bid for the right to close one of their starting coal or gas power plants, and then that is the end of the round, and the rounds continue until a player is determined. Also launching on March 1st, we have Shhnable Wabble, and this plays 3 to 10 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and this is a party acting game where players are going to be acting out different scenes for the other players to try and guess, and if you're able to guess correctly, your team's going to win points. But there is also a catch to this game, because players will be able to make outrageous demands in the middle of the acting scene, and if the player acting is also able to fulfill those outrageous demands while still fulfilling the scene and allowing the players to guess correctly, you're going to earn bonus points. So this adds a little bit of a twist and some additional humor to a system that players are familiar with through other games such as charades. And launching on March 1st, we have Fire and Stone, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and this one's going to be my pick of the week. And before I get into the reasons why, I just want to mention that this is coming from the same designer who created one of the best games ever made, which is Carcassonne, which in my opinion is a near perfect game. That's not the reason that I'm making this one my pick of the week, but after looking into this game, it's no surprise to me that this is coming from the same designer, because I think this one does share that same simplicity that Carcassonne has, but then still offers that incredible depth. And in this game, players are cavemen in a Stone Age world. They're going to be playing on a map that's divided into several regions, and players are all going to be starting on the same starting point on the map, and they're going to be moving their pawn outward from there. Players can move to explore a region, and when they do that, they're going to reveal the token that is face down on that region. And there's a few types of tokens that players can encounter. The most basic is the gathering token, which can be represented by some different images of food, and if players gain 2 of the same type, then they can trade that into either either gain a point card, which will score the player's points at the end of the game, or they can instead trade it for an invention card, which will give them a special ability for the remainder of the game. And this sounds pretty simple until you realize that you can't actually get a point card until you get an invention card, because you need to actually cover your invention card with the point card, which means that you will no longer have access to that special ability. And that doesn't sound too complicated until I also mention that the point cards are worth more at the start of the game, so you want to be the first to get those, which means that you're also going to be the first to cancel out your special abilities, which is going to make you think twice as you try to make the tough decision between more points or a special ability that will help you further throughout the game. Other than gathering tokens, players can also flip the tile to reveal a forest, and if this happens, then that tile remains on the board in the region that it was discovered, and that region will now generate animals, so players can visit that region to gain an animal token. And these are useful for a couple reasons, because players can also flip the tile to reveal a fire token, and this will also remain on the board. And if players visit a fire, then they can convert animals into food or bags. Players can only store as much food as they have bags, which they'll track on their player board, and every time a player gains a bag, they'll be adding it to this recessed region on the left side of their board. And the reason that players want more bags is so that they can hold more food, because the other tile that you can discover is a hut tile, and this is a region where you can build huts, and in order to build a hut, you're trading in food. Each hut is worth 1 point, but you'll also gain bonus points if you have the most huts in a region at the end of the game. And that's pretty much all there is to this game, so it's really easy to teach and play, but you can see it has quite a lot of depth with the different options that you have at your disposal and timing certain actions and deciding when you want to trade in your inventions for victory points. And there's still one more twist to this game, because midway through, all the players will gain a second meeple that they'll be putting out on the board, and players will be able to control both those meeples on their turn, increasing the rate that they'll be able to cover ground and perform different actions. At the end of the game, the player with the most victory points wins the game. Also launching on March 1st, we have Spring and Autumn, the Story of China. And this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 120 to 180 minutes to play. And this is a 4X game where players are starting as a small tribe, but then they're trying to grow it into a full dynasty of China. And players are going to be trying to do this by fulfilling private and public objectives. And the end of the game is going to be triggered once a player completes 3 public objectives. If you are familiar with the game Ellenica, the Story of Greece, this is going to be building upon that rule set. So if you are a fan of this game, you're definitely going to want to pay attention to Spring and Autumn, the Story of China. And in this game, players are going to be taking control of their units to explore the world around them, expand their borders, research advancements, and build up their economy and bring honor upon their name. On their turn, players are going to be performing different actions to explore and conquer, train different types of units, research new actions, engage in commerce, and honor their ancestors. Honor has 2 effects in this game. It determines player order, and also the player with the least honor cannot win the game. So you're always going to want to stay away from being the lowest on the totem pole. And the final action players can do is to build shrines to gain some special abilities. This game does use dice rolling for battle, and depending on the units that you have out on the board, it's going to determine which dice you get to roll. And players are going to be rolling dice simultaneously, eliminating their opponent's units. And once an entire side is eliminated, the remaining one is the winner of that region. The game also has world events that will occasionally appear, and these can be good or bad, and these will be triggered by this chaos meter that is shaped on this dragon. Once that meter gets completely full, all the players are going to be bidding on the world event, and the player that wins it is going to dictate how it unfolds. And if you're familiar with Ellenica, the Story of Greece, this is going to be using that same system, but adding philosophy, diplomacy, enhanced combat, the honor system, expanded victory conditions, and a Great Wall and Chinese dragons. Also launching on March 1st, we have Western Legends, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And before I get too far ahead of myself, this isn't going to be adding any new gameplay content. This is primarily for a big box solution and a insert to go along with it. So this is going to be offering all the previous content that you already know and love, but you can expect some additional promo cards in the stretch goals, but nothing too crazy. All the expansions for this are already created, and they're not adding anything more to this game. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a very well rated game, and it makes a lot of people's top 100 lists, and more recently this did appear on Trey Parker's top 10 list at number 10. And yes, Trey Parker, the creator of South Park, does love board games. He has featured them on a few South Park episodes, and he has met Tom Vassell on several occasions, and more recently they did just put up a very entertaining video. I highly recommend watching it. I'll leave a link to it right up here, where the Dice Tower and Trey Parker go over his top 10 games. And this is a very thematic sandbox Western game where players can earn victory points in a number of different different ways. They can either farm cattle, find gold, earn a legitimate living, or instead you can choose to be a bandit and try to steal from the other players and the locals, or you could try and enforce the law and bring the peace. The nice thing about this game is it's completely up to you, and you can make those decisions as the game unfolds and depending on the opportunities that are presented to you. I'm not going to get too into the gameplay for this one because this campaign's just offering a big box solution, and there is a ton of content out there on this game already if you want to learn more. And the nice thing here is that the Matago website already shows you exactly what you're going to get in this big box solution, and it shows you all the different inserts that you can expect, and these are all designed to help you set up the game and put it away faster and store all the content and all the expansions and bonus material in a single box. And if you want to get notified of this one, they don't have a pre-launch page set up yet, so you'll want to sign up on their website, and I'll have a link to that in the description below. Also launching on March 1st, we have Solar 175, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 40 to 120 minutes to play. And this game mixes elements of Legacy, Euro, and 4X games, but primarily focuses on area control, worker placement, and bag building. And this is going to be set in an expanding solar system with an emerging narrative where players are going to have to make some ethical and philosophical choices as they try to gain the most influence points by exploring the solar system, establishing their presence there, and defending their presence, mining for resources to build giant megastructures, and to build biodome outposts to increase their wealth and gain special bonuses, as they are simultaneously influencing the elections and government. And the game plays over a series of rounds until an endgame condition is met, and each round is made up of 3 phases. First, there's the draw phase where players will be drawing from their individual draw bags, drawing workers of different colors, and the different colors represent the different skills that these workers have, and these different colors will be associated with different actions on the player's player board. And actions of a given color will require a worker of that same color, and you might require multiple workers of different types in order to fulfill the requirements of a single action. After all the players have assigned workers up to their allowable amount, players will then move into the action phase where they'll be removing workers from those action spaces and then performing those actions. And the different actions will be to move or build outposts, perform trade, remove workers permanently for massive effects, or hire new workers that they can add to their pool into their drawback. And play continues like this until a single player has completely built their 15 unique outpost tokens, and that triggers the election phase where the endgame scoring occurs. The endgame scoring does vary from game to game because players will be influencing the government throughout the game for their individual benefits, and the decisions that players made throughout the game will dictate what earns victory points and the magnitude of victory points that will be earned. This means that players will really want to make sure that they have a grip on the government or do a really great job of rolling with the punches. And the next campaign also launches on March 1st, but this one is not a board game, it's actually a role-playing game, and it's called the Fragged Empire. And this takes place 100 years after a genocidal war that has completely wiped out humanity. But before this occurred, humans were able to create a new genetically engineered successors called the Archons, which players will be playing as, and you'll be rediscovering everything that was lost and discovering the technology and empires that were left behind. A number of tribes have resurfaced, picking up the pieces of what was left behind. Many are hostile, while many are friendly, and players will have to decide how they choose to move forward and how they want to shape the world. And the next campaign we have also launching on March 1st is one that I thought was launching last week, so I already covered it, and this one's called Alice in Wordland. And I will roll that footage now. And launching on February 22nd, we have Alice in Wordland, Curiouser, and Curiouser. And this plays 3 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a tea party game hosted by the fair and reasonable Queen of Hearts. Each round, players are going to be taking the role of one of the Alice in Wonderland characters, each with their own special ability. But of course, any party hosted by the Queen of Hearts is going to have some questionable rules, and whoever is playing as the Queen of Hearts is the one to set up the round. And they're going to be selecting a topic that the players need to talk about, as well as a few letters that players will have to avoid. And the way that this game works is that the topic card along with those forbidden letters are all going to be revealed, and then players have to go around the circle clockwise from the Queen of Hearts and state one word related to that topic that doesn't have any of those forbidden letters. If it does, then you are eliminated from that round, or if you say a word that was already said previously, then you are also eliminated from the round. The catch here is that you're going to be passing around this teapot, and it has a 10-second timer, and if you are unable to complete a word within those 10 seconds, then you are also eliminated from the round. The longer that you're able to stay in the game, the more points that you'll be able to score. Each round, players will pass their character card clockwise so that they get to experience each character and each special ability that comes along with it. The game ends once each player has played every character, and then the person with the most victory points wins the game. This new expansion is going to be adding some new characters that can be mixed into the game, but it's also going to be adding a new event deck as well. And the way that that works is that each round you're going to be drawing a new event card, and that's going to have some different effects that will affect all players in the game, and maybe change the way that you're scoring or add a small mini game. The campaign will also offer some deluxified components to really sell that tea party theme, with some miniature teacups to go along with that teapot timer. This is a game that I have played in the past, and it really is a lot of fun. It's a game that you can play with any age group, and you'll be guaranteed to have a ton of laughs. It's really easy to learn and really quick to play, so there is a low barrier to entry. And if this one does interest you, check out the link in the description below. And the next campaign we have is the Worldbreakers Advent of Khanate. And this plays 1 to 2 players. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this is a card battler duel game set in an alternate 13th century Asia. And this is the same time period where Genghis Khan and Marco Polo took place. And in this game, players are taking the role of a world breaker. And a world breaker is a person who can take advantage of a special resource in order to magnify their natural abilities. And players will be starting the game by choosing one of the available world breakers as well as their deck of 30 cards. And the different cards within the deck are events which grant some one-time instant effects, followers which can be used to attack your opponents or defend against your opponents, and when you use them they get exhausted and they cannot block, attack, or be used until they are unexhausted on a following turn. And then finally you can get locations which grant special effects, but they are also expensive and vulnerable. This game uses 2 types of resources. The first one is known as Mythium, and this essentially acts as a currency in the game, and you're going to be spending it to activate different cards as well as your world breaker. The second resource is known as standing, and in this game there's 4 different world breaker guilds, and the standing that you hold with each of those guilds is represented by a number, and that is essentially the trust that that guild has for you. And whenever you play a card, you're going to have to pay an amount of Mythium, but then you might also require a certain amount of standing with a guild to also be able to play that card. And players will be playing their cards and attacking their opponent and building locations in order to gain power, and the goal is to finish a round with 10 power in order to win the game. Each round is made up of a total of 8 turns, with each player getting 4 turns each as they alternate back and forth. And on a player's turn, they get to perform 1 action, and they can use an action to either gain 1 currency, pay a currency to gain standing with one of the guilds, draw a card, attack the opponent, or use a card's ability paying the cost to play that card. When a player chooses to attack the opponent, they're going to choose which cards they want to attack with, and you can select multiple cards, and then you're going to exhaust those cards, and then the opponent chooses which cards they want to use to block with. Players will simultaneously deal wounds, and any cards that have a strength lower than the wounds that were dealt will get removed from the play area. If any attackers are left after this is resolved, then they can also attack the location cards of the opponent player. This will simultaneously hurt the amount of power that the opponent has while raising the amount of power that the attacker has. And the first player to end the round with 10 power wins the game. Also launching on March 1st, we have Library Labyrinth, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this is a cooperative game set in a cursed library. Literary horrors have escaped from their books into reality, and it's up to the players to work together to return these horrors back to where they belong. The game features an adjustable difficulty to play with all age groups, and the game features a mashup of female literary and historical characters such as Alice in Wonderland or Ada Lovelace, as well as a mashup of different horrors that players will have to deal with from different stories such as the Kraken, Dracula, or the Big Bad Wolf. And the game is played on 25 different tiles that can be rotated and flipped to reveal the changing parts of the library, and some of these areas can spawn different terrors. Players can defeat the horrors by drafting book cards from their hands featuring a character with a combination of 6 different skills. Players will team up and combine the different cards with the different skills required in order to put that horror back to where it belongs. Once the players have collected all the necessary skills, they'll travel through the library to place the terror back on the correct shelf. On a player's turn, they can pick up cards, trade cards, flip or rotate floor tiles, move their character, capture a terror, or put a terror back on the right shelf. Players can choose up to 3 actions, but they can also choose to donate one of their actions to another player. After each player's turn, a curse card is drawn, and this is going to disrupt disrupt the play area and possibly spawn new terrors. The game is won when all 6 shelves have been filled with the captured terrors, and the game is lost if the deck of curse cards runs out or if all 6 of the terrors are simultaneously on the library floor. And the next campaign we have launching on March 1st is Earth Under Siege Flashpoint, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a cooperative campaign game where aliens have attacked Earth, and Earth has put together its own elite team of humans in order to fight back, and players will be taking the fight to the aliens using stealth, sabotage, and ambush to push back against the enemy. Players can do things like cut the power, crawl through ventilation shafts, make use of silenced weapons, and hack the enemy databases. And I think the stealth aspect of this game is something that I would really enjoy. It's not something that I see too much in these types of games, but it's something that you see a lot in video games, where you can enter into a battle where the enemy starts unaware of your presence, and you can try to do as much damage stealthily as you can to tip the battle in your favor, but then at some point you're probably going to get caught, or it just makes sense to go guns blazing, and then at that point it turns into your typical firefight. And this game even takes that to the next level, because at the start of each scenario, players can choose a strategy card, and this is going to give a few options of the player's loadout and their starting conditions. So if you want to go heavy stealth, you can do that with that strategy card, or if you want to get a little bit more creative or go guns blazing, there will most likely be some strategy cards for that as well. In each round, players can perform a series of actions by exhausting one of their 6 action tokens until they either run out of actions or they choose to pass. And players may want to pass early because you can only refresh 3 actions per turn. So if you use all 6 of your tokens, you're going to be really limited on your following turn. Although that also gives you the flexibility to have a massive impactful turn if you feel like it is worth spending all those tokens. Each character is unique and comes with its own stats for attack, defense, science, and stealth, and it also comes with its own deck of tactics cards which give them access to powerful actions and effects, and each player will develop these decks throughout the game, modifying, adding, and removing cards and tailoring the deck to the style that they want to play as and the combos that they want to achieve. Of course, players will also be finding all sorts of weapons, both human and alien weapons, and players can add this to their arsenal and further customize their character. And there's a few different types of enemies in the game. You have your basic enemies and your elite enemies, and they're going to have some amount of perception, movement, and attack, where perception is their ability to detect you. Some of these characters also have special abilities that can trigger under certain circumstances. The enemies also feature an escalation track, and as that progresses, the game's going to get harder and harder, spawning more enemies and potentially triggering alarms, which will alert all the enemies of your presence, causing them all to head directly towards your characters. Players will be performing different checks depending on their stats and the items they have, and then combat is done with a series of dice rolling and card play where players will be using special abilities, but then also trying to have a number of hits greater than the enemy's health. In each scenario, players will be trying to complete different objectives, and if they're able to do so, they will move forward throughout the campaign, and the core campaign will feature over 20 scenarios for the players to explore. Also launching on March 1st, we have Word Explosion, and this plays 2 to 8 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a party word game where players start the game with a hand of 10 cards, and players want to be the first player to eliminate all the cards from their hand in order to win the game. Players' hands will be made up of letter cards and action cards, and on a player's turn they have a few options to choose from. They can either use an action card to perform its effect, or they can play their letter cards into the shared discard pile to get rid of those cards from their hand. If you can match the last letter played, then you can also discard that letter, or instead you can choose to discard the next letter in the alphabet. So if an S was played before you, you can play a T, but the most advanced and best way to discard letters from your hand is to use the last letter played as the first letter to spell a word with cards from your hand. So in this example, S was the last letter that was played, and then this player is spelling the word stop in order to discard all those cards from their hand. If a player is unable to discard a card, then they have to draw cards until they're able to. And if someone gets rid of all their cards first, not all hope is lost, because if the next player is able to spell a word with the last letter that they put on the pile, then that blocks them from winning. So if you're a fan of word games and a little bit of Take That, this is definitely one to check out. Links in the description below. Launching on March 3rd, we have an expansion to Small Samurai Empires, and this is called The Rise of Tokugawa. And if you're not familiar with the original game, this played 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a fairly simple game to learn, but it does offer a lot of depth. The basics of this game is that you're going to be playing across 2 different boards. The first board is a map of Japan where players are going to be taking turns putting action tokens out on the board, and you're going to be performing the action that is outlined on the board. You're going to be putting those action tokens tokens upside down because the second phase of each round, you're going to be flipping up those tokens and then performing the action that is on the bottom of that action token. So there's a few things you'll want to take in consideration as you're placing your action tokens, and these action tokens will get resolved in a particular order, either from the bottom of Japan to the top or vice versa, depending on the round. So you'll also want to consider that when performing your actions. The different actions will allow players to put armies out on the board or attack other players' armies, removing them from the board, or gaining resources that they can spend to perform some other actions, such as building castles or putting out additional units. And the whole goal of this is to control different spaces on the map, because the number of spaces that you control in a region will gain you that much influence in that region. Players will also be spending destiny cards throughout the game to modify the value of the influence in each area, so some of these tracks might be worth more than others when you get to the end of the game and the victory points are scored. And the process of playing the different destiny cards, putting out your action tokens, and then resolving those tokens is going to happen several times, because there's 3 rounds in the game, each representing an era, and then each era has 2 phases where you're going to be placing and resolving action tokens. The new campaign will be offering a few new items, including a solo mode, a 5th player, as well as a playmat and deluxified components. But it's also going to be adding new units to the mix that you can put out on the board, and the different units will each have their own special abilities and scoring potentials. In addition to these different units, this expansion will also add unique player abilities. This is another one of those games that I'm super interested in. Not only do I love the look and theme that it's offering, but I also think this has a very elegant design and it has a very simple rule set, but with a lot of depth. And if you are interested, make sure to click that notify me button, because they are throwing in some free sleeves if you back in the first 72 hours. And those are all the campaigns for this week. Quite a long episode. I think that's been the longest week we've had all year. And it looks like the next few weeks are going to be a ton of games as well. So make sure to stay tuned and subscribe if you like this sort of content and you want to stay up to date with the upcoming episodes. But that's not all I have for you this episode, because we do have a giveaway to announce, and this is going to be for a pledge for Kabula. And this is a competitive board game where players are competing to steal the Kabula at the center of the board. But the catch here is that it is guarded by a scary and weird monster. This is a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, and you're going to be encountering some very strange creatures and quite a lot of humor along the way. Players will each be controlling their own character that they can develop and gain skills and new personality traits along the way, and you're going to be exploring different tiles to find new items, fight wild monsters, fight other characters, and even tame monsters to be your own personal companion. Players will be managing different types of tokens in order to perform different actions and engage in battles, and these different tokens all represent different areas of your body. So you're really going to be putting your body to work here. And just to give you a little bit of a taste of how wild and creative some of the creatures are in this game, you can just see some of the different miniatures and characters in this list of monsters here. I'm actually kind of impressed by how diverse these miniatures are, from being completely silly and ridiculous to looking actually pretty awesome. And this giveaway is going to be for the big package pledge, which comes with the core game as well as all unlocked stretch goals, but it's also going to upgrade your standees to miniatures. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Kabula and let us know of your creative, ridiculous monster that you think should be added to this game. For myself, I think I would add a sort of mimic character, but instead of it being a treasure chest, I think there's something that's much more tempting, and that would be a board game shelf. Because one thing that I know for sure is that if mimics came in the form of board game shelves, I'd be done for pretty quick. Good luck in the contest, and that's all I have for this week, but stay tuned because I do have a lot of giveaways in the queue, and I'll be going over those in the coming weeks. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.